Just want to welcome everyone as they're entering the room. We're going to give it a couple of minutes to let everyone join in, and then we will probably get started in a minute or two. Again, if you're new and just kind of entered the room, just want to say welcome. I think we're just going to give it a little bit less than another 60 seconds to let everyone who's attending to enter the room, and then we're going to get started. Excited to have you join us for the next 90 minutes to discuss subsidized affordable housing. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us to kick off Affordable Housing Month with today's conversation about the essentials of subsidized affordable housing and how to create vastly more of it across the Bay Area and California. My name is Todd David, and for those who do not know me, I'm the Executive Director of the Housing Action Coalition. We're a member-supported nonprofit that advocates for building more housing for residents of all income levels to help alleviate the Bay Area's housing shortage, displacement, and affordability crisis. A key component of our work is advocating for the creation of new affordable homes and advancing local and statewide policies to make it faster and easier to approve and build housing that all neighbors can afford. For such an important topic, we're fortunate to be joined by a panel of experts who have devoted their careers to making affordable housing a more widely available to our region's residents. We're honored to welcome Redwood City Mayor Giselle Hale. Welcome, Mayor Hale.
Thank you for having me, Todd.
Our pleasure. East Bay Housing Organization, or better known as EBHO, Executive Director Gloria Bruce. Hello, Gloria.
Hi, Todd. Thanks for having me. Welcome, everyone.
It's our pleasure. And I think for the fourth year in a row, kicking off the event is our good friend, Mission Housing Executive Director, Sam Moss. Sam, say something nice to the audience.
Hello, everybody. Thank God that we are finally doing this again for the fourth year in a row. No, I'm really excited. This is always one of my favorite events, and I love that we always kick the month off with it. So let's do it.
Cool. Well, great. Well, we'll be getting to you in 1 minute, Sam. I also want to thank them for taking time out of their busy schedules to join us today. I also want to thank our outstanding co-presenters for bringing all of us together. So many thanks to Greenbelt Alliance, the Housing Leadership Council of San Mateo County, Silicon Valley at Home, EBHO, and YIMBY Action. So we're going to begin with an overview presented by Sam Moss, again, who leads Mission Housing, a leader in housing production, financing, and supportive services. So turning it over to you, Sam.
Okay, great. And I will share my screen real quick. Let me know if everyone can please see it. Are we good? Is that, yeah? Okay. So I'll be real brief. And, I think I just want to say it. affordable housing, our industry is really complicated. It's super acronym heavy. And we're going to try to have a quick 101 type of few-minute presentation here about what is subsidized affordable housing. Well, what is that actually? I think it doesn't take a lot of reading in the news to see that the term affordable housing is a buzzword on everyone's lips. We need more affordable housing. And that does not always mean the same thing to everyone. I like to say that there is housing that is affordable to everyone, and then there is capital A, capital H, affordable housing. And for the purpose of this quick talk, we will talk about what is subsidized affordable housing. So real quick, Mission Housing Development Corporation is a 50-year nonprofit. We are one of the oldest in the Bay Area, founded in 1971. We have 38 buildings with about 1,000 in our pipeline. Currently have a little bit more than 3,000 tenants with 50 plus partners, and 100% of our buildings are affordable housing, capital A, capital H. And what does that mean? That means that we have a partnership with a government entity to do what is called deed restricting our units, which means that we sign an agreement with the government that restricts the amount of income someone can make to still qualify to lease our buildings when we have an open unit. The income is based on the rent that they have is based on the area median income, which we'll get into soon, commonly known as AMI. But for the most part, the main point of affordable housing in the legal sense of the word is that it's a partnership between a nonprofit developer and a government entity for a rental or ownership housing subsidy. This crude way of describing it, it is typically a tenant will not pay more than a third of their income, which is the tenant portion of the $100 bill. And the government will pay whatever the difference is between a third of or 30% of a tenant's income and the rent that we need to make up. These are commonly referred to as Section 8 subsidies, and more recently, RAD subsidies, which are rental assistance demonstration through HUD. There are many forms of government subsidies, local subsidies, state subsidies, federal subsidies, but affordable housing in the legal deed restricted sense usually means that the nonprofit affordable developer owns a property and signs an illegally binding agreement with the government saying that we will restrict what each unit is rented for in perpetuity. And we sign that because if the nonprofit developer such as Mission Housing, God forbid, goes away, because the deed restricted is in place, the local housing authority, such as the San Francisco Housing Authority, the Oakland Housing Authority, the San Francisco Mayor's Office of Housing, they can then say, well, there's a deed restriction. A market rate developer is not allowed to come take this property, and they can just essentially move in another nonprofit to the space. And that's why the deed restriction is so important. Here's a handshaking between Mission Housing, the Mayor's Office of Housing. It is not always that smooth, I assure you. My staff will tell you that it can be at times frustrating to have a public-private partnership that is the affordable housing industry. But for the most part, we all want the same thing, and that is to ensure that we have high quality, low income, not low quality, low cost, if you will, to rent our buildings. So a lot of people say, well, what does that even mean, right? Area median income, AMI. So there's 3 levels of what's considered low income in the legal sense. There's very low income households, low income households, and moderate or sometimes middle income households. For the most part, the nonprofit affordable housing industry can sign deed restrictions and get subsidies up to about 80% of median income. And that is what is considered low income throughout California. In the last 5 to 10 years, there have been some programs, both at the federal and the state level, that allow us to do the same thing and get subsidies for moderate income, which typically doesn't go above 105% of the area median income. And these are examples of, on the screen right now, of salaries that between 1 and 4 people can earn, the total amount of money that one person up to a 4-person can earn and still qualify at the high end level of the median income allowance. So The reason I bring that up is because if Mission Housing builds a building and we say that it won't be more than 80% of median income, that doesn't mean you have to make 80% to qualify. That means that anyone from 80% median income all the way down, in some cases, to 0 or 30% of median income will be able to qualify for some number of units at the building. So these are ceilings, not floors. And I think it's really important to point that out because, you know, there are sticker shocks, you know, I mean, there are a lot of people who would say that $70,000 a year is not necessarily low income. But then when you think about how much the cost of living is in the Bay Area, I think it makes sense. And as you can see, if you are a single parent with 2 children, you would qualify to make $92,250 instead of just the $71,700. And the more dependents you have in your household, the more money you can make and still qualify. We put this little thing together. I think sometimes we throw out numbers and salaries and it gets confusing. So I think I love this graph. These are not the only occupations that qualify, but I think it puts it into perspective, right? We say that a family of 4 can't make more than $102,000, but 2 home health aides make $96,000. 2 entry-level San Francisco Unified School District teachers make $120,000. So we try to make our programs serve those that need them. And the only way to really do that, I believe, is to have honest conversations, discussions about the salaries in an area, because as cost of living goes up, in some way or another, CPI and salaries will go up as well. And it's important to keep that in mind. And this is just some more examples of 70% of AMI, some typical jobs up to 80% of AMI. And as you can see, these are middle, what we commonly refer to as working class, middle class jobs in a lot of instances. And because of the vast housing shortage in the Bay Area, and because of all of the jobs that we've brought into the Bay Area over the last 20 to 30 years, these historically good jobs that would have allowed a family to get a home and they don't anymore. And so this is just up to 80% of AMI, these jobs, and then up to 100%, and I think, again, these aren't the only jobs that qualify, but I think it puts it into perspective because you get a lot of conversations about, well, who are you building affordable housing for who? And, the answer is whoever needs it, as far as Mission Housing is concerned. And a lot of times people don't realize what $100,000 actually means in the Bay Area. And with that, I just want to point out one last thing, and is why is subsidized affordable housing so important? Why can't we just build a bunch of market rate housing and have that work? And while I do think that's important as well, while I do think rent control is important and tenant protections are absolutely important, when the nonprofit affordable developer signs the deed restriction we were talking about before, that property is now bound by the strongest tenant protections in the nation. HUD, California Housing Community Development, HCD, the San Francisco Mayor's Office of Housing, they all have extremely strong tenant protection rules. And the only way to get the subsidies that the nonprofit needs to build the building, which is also how we make our money, is to legally say we will give, we will not evict tenants unless it is the absolute dire, most last resort. Mission Housing has our biggest and most important department is our resident and community services department. And that is solely to connect with our tenants. And if they need help, if they are struggling with rent, or if they're struggling with anything, we engage them early. And, we enjoyed a very small percentage of our tenants during COVID so far who needed to apply for rental assistance. But when they did, we helped with the safety net and helped our tenants apply and obtain the funds. And, I think that's really a major difference between just rent controlled market rate housing and subsidized capital A, capital H affordable housing, in that the owner is not focused on charging as much rent as possible. We're not focused on, how do we have churn and make as much money as possible. And because of that, our tenants are that much more protected. And if you have any further questions, and they are good questions and they're happy questions, direct them to me. If you have mean questions, Todd David's contact information will be given at the end of the presentation. thanks everybody.
Hey, Sam, I was just wondering if I could just do a quick follow-up question for you, one or two, and I don't know if you know this, but I am curious, right? Obviously, there's like a phenomenal demand, right, for housing and a demand for a huge demand for affordable housing. Can you give an idea, like how much is going to come online? And maybe if you want to just speak to mission housing, but if you know in the overall industry, like in San Francisco, how many units of affordable housing can we expect over the next 12 to 24 months in San Francisco?
So, I'm Gloria has a much better hold on non-San Francisco, because when you live in San Francisco, there is nowhere else. I swear to God, there is nowhere else. I mean, there's only, but in all seriousness, the answer is thousands of units of 100% affordable are in the process of actually starting to come online now. Unfortunately, between the year of 2000 and 2010, the Mission District and the Tenderloin did not, Mission built 0 new affordable homes, and the Tenderloin did not build that many either. We had some in Soma and Mission Bay, but there was an unfortunate 10-year lag with the closing of redevelopment and everything. But in the 10 years after that, the 12 years after that, I have to say, I'm proud, San Francisco Mayor's Office of Housing has funded and facilitated more 100% affordable housing new projects than most states in the country. And I'd say the East Bay also has done that. And the demand is so much higher than anything that we can actually deliver, unless the government gives all of us a magical money tree. But I can say that the Mission, for instance, by the end of this year, will have 1,000 new units that came online over the last 3 years. The Tenderloin is the same way. Mission Bay, Treasure Island has thousands of units that are coming online. So there's been a lot of developments in the works for a long time that are finally physically coming to fruition.
Great. Thank you, Sam. I appreciate it. And so now it is my pleasure to turn it over to Gloria Bruce, the Executive Director of EBHO. And so, Gloria, do you want to give us a little overview of what EBHO does and some of your priorities? And then I will also ask you a similar question to Sam as to like, hey, how much, affordable housing?
Okay, I'm going to tell you right now, I can't give you a concrete number of how many.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Sam was like, Gloria will know that. I was like, I will not actually, but I can tell you lots of other important things. Good afternoon, everybody. Again, as Todd said, my name is Gloria Bruce, and I'm the Executive Director of East Bay Housing Organizations. We have an S at the end of our name because we bring together a lot of members and organizations across Alameda and Contra Costa County to preserve, protect, and create affordable housing opportunities. Or as it's often known in our world, we do what's known as the 3 Ps: producing affordable housing, producing it, which means building it. I prefer create, but it doesn't go with the alliteration. So we'll go with produce affordable housing. We preserve affordable housing. So anything that's out there that's already either deed restricted or more affordable naturally, we want to keep that affordable. And protect, we want to protect people in the homes that they have. So EBHO works on all 3 of those. We are a little different from Sam's organization, which actually is a developer that builds and manages homes, as he talked about. We do advocacy. We do education. We reach out to explain everything that Sam just said. We are pushing for different laws, different tools, different funding across the East Bay and occasionally beyond, so that everybody has a place to live. And we are supporting the organizations and the people who do that work. We also do direct organizing and leadership development with directly impacted people who are residents of subsidized affordable housing. So that's a little bit about what we do. So just to say just a couple quick things about our approach to follow up on what Sam did. And I'm very grateful that he hit all the high points of the numbers and the area median income and all that. So I don't have to. We work on tenant protections and homelessness and anti-displacement, but we're most known for our work on production of affordable homes, which is obviously a critical piece of making sure that people are not unhoused and that people aren't displaced. But as Sam said, it's incredibly difficult, and I'm glad we're doing this 101. I was actually hanging out with some friends of our family yesterday, and one of my friends, right before I was about to leave, was like, Gloria, can you tell me, how's this affordable housing crisis going? And also, like, what are the solutions to it? And I was like, dude, I got to leave in 5 minutes. And you just asked me about my entire job and everything that I do every day. But I said, well, the situation is bad, even though there are lots of amazing things happening. And yes, something can be done about it. And he asked, well, how does it work? I mean, how do you build a building that's all affordable housing? How do you make any money off of doing that? Why would anyone build it? Because how do you make any money off of that? And so I had to explain to him, well, housing people of limited means is not a profit-making enterprise unless you are a slumlord. So there's money to be made off of housing people of limited means if you're doing a bad job of that. But if you're trying to provide people with quality homes that give them stability and give them health and safety and all of that, you do not make a profit serving people who aren't high income in this. And you know, like that should be okay. But unfortunately in our society, housing is viewed through the lens of a profitable commodity. And so we have to fill the gap somewhere. And so what you saw with Sam is kind of that breakdown of that dollar bill where we have the tenants who pay what rent they can. And that's the difference in subsidized affordable housing is tenants are, first of all, tenants are paying rent. So this is not free housing. Tenants are paying rent. It's not the world that my son has created with his Barbie dolls. He plays with Barbies a lot, and I let him do it because he's created a very progressive Barbie community where he tells me all of the houses are free and everybody's vaccinated, including the babies, because they're scientifically advanced. It's not like that world, unfortunately. So our tenants do pay rent, but the government makes up the rest, and that's how we make it workable, and that's how nonprofits are able to break even on this work. As Sam said, they're in it for the mission, not for the money. The mission is to house people. One other thing I'll say about, you know, when we're talking about subsidized affordable housing, it's important to note, if you don't know this, the biggest recipients in this country of housing subsidies are homeowners, and in fact, higher income homeowners. So when we say subsidized, I want us to really keep in mind that our government actually gives a significant tax credit to homeowners like myself, who are fortunate to take that, to the tune of $25 billion a year across the country. And so I just want us to think about it's important to have homeownership as a driver of wealth, especially for Black and Brown communities. My family and I are a recipient of that and beneficiary of that. But what if we took that $25 billion, that was an extra incentive for homeownership, and redistributed it to people who are further down the income scale, especially since it's been shown it mostly affects higher income people. And actually, I'll just post in the chat a great report. If you want to go down the rabbit hole of that whole issue on the mortgage interest deduction, go ahead. I just posted that in the chat. But so I just want to point that out. And I guess just the last thing I'll say for now, we'll come back to all of this. But as Sam pointed out, we do need these government supports because affordable housing is not cheap housing. It's not low quality housing. You may have heard things or you may have images in your head of the past, which are probably not even accurate. But today's affordable housing is built to last. It's thoughtfully designed. It includes services. It's there for the long term. And that means it's not cheap. And so we have to find ways to support it. And that's what my organization is all about. And so I will just drop in the chat if you want to learn a lot more, including all those facts and figures that Sam shared. We have what's called a study room, which is a big resource page where you can learn so much more. So I'll leave it there because I know I'll have more time to talk later. Thanks, Todd.
No, thank you, Gloria. And I want to, there are a couple of things that you brought up that I do want to make sure that we come back to. One that I definitely want to make sure that we come back to is, you know, the low and middle income home ownership opportunities. Like I definitely want to make sure, I think it's a really important part of this conversation. So I want to, you know, make sure we circle back. The other thing that I just kind of want to say out loud is, you know, the pro-housing advocacy organizations that are like, hey, let's build housing at all levels of affordability, right? We will sometimes get questions from like, you know, our members or supporters be like, well, Todd, like, why do we need subsidized affordable? Like, won't the market just like, if we just build enough market housing, won't this take care of it? And I just want to say the answer is no. The market is never going to build low income. It's not set up to build low income affordable housing, which is why pro-housing organizations like the Housing Action Coalition and like, you know, all of our partners, right? We are so 100% supportive of the subsidies, right? That you need to build these 100% affordable housing projects because it is not housing that the market is going to build. So if you are a pro-housing person, you should always be supportive of funding for 100% affordable housing. Okay, that's my little stump speech. Now I'm going to introduce our last panelist, who is a very good friend of the Housing Action Coalition. So thank you. Up next, we're going to hear from Redwood City Mayor Giselle Hale, who's worked tirelessly to make affordable housing more accessible and abundant. Mayor Hale, thank you for joining us to discuss your priorities for increasing the supply of affordable housing. And I also want to thank you, Mayor Hale, for being one of the elected leaders on housing issues in the Bay Area. Like, it is because of really bold leadership like yours that organizations like mine feel that there is a really bright future for affordable housing. So I just want to thank you for your work and your advocacy.
Thank you. Thank you, Todd. It's great to be here and good to meet with Gloria and Sam, and now Sam's dog, it appears. You're on mute.
Thank you. It's only 2.5 years into the into Zoom. So I was curious, Mayor Hale, did you talk at all about kind of Redwood City's interaction with affordable housing and kind of, right, like I know, and maybe a lot of people don't, maybe some people do, of that Redwood City has been one of the phenomenal actors when it comes to housing production. And so can you speak a little bit to kind of like your experience there?
Yeah, so great to be here. And yes, happy Affordable Housing Month. This is a great way to kick it off. Many people probably don't know, but Redwood City is really a Bay Area leader on housing and affordable housing production. By way of example, we were actually the first city to submit our housing element in the Bay Area. It's already done. When many cities were rallying against their RHNA numbers, Redwood City submitted 180% of our goal. And we focused a lot of the excess on very low and extremely low income housing. And extremely low is actually not even required by the state as a part of the housing element exercise. But we focused on it because we know that is what it is going to take to get people housed. We know that many of the people who are experiencing homelessness are not going to be able to even afford very low income housing. And so we really took it as an exercise in meeting the needs in the community and not just meeting numbers in a spreadsheet. For us, it's really about the people. I'm really grateful to be mayor of a city that really gets the need for housing. You know, not only is it our #1 community concern, and I know that because we poll our community every other year, and housing has been consistently the #1 concern, it's also our council's #1 priority. One of the best things we did as a council was to adopt a strategic plan with housing as the #1 priority. And what that means is that when you have people of different political persuasions, maybe you don't agree on everything. Maybe you don't even agree on every tactic for housing. But if you can agree on the problem, and if you can agree that this is the problem the community most needs your leadership and action on, great things can happen. Because it's not just about the council, it's about empowering your staff. And so when we set that as the direction, we were able to set our staff on a path of fulfilling these needs. So Redwood City actually, over the last RHNA cycle, we produced the most housing in this county, 2,900 units, over 2,900 units permitted. That's 1,000 units more than actually the largest city in this county, which is the city of San Mateo. So we really have done our part. We didn't hit all of our goals across every area of affordability. Like Gloria had mentioned with the 3 Ps, we have the 3 Ps as a part of our housing goal. We actually have a 4th P, which you'll love to hear, which is partner. We really want to partner with groups that are addressing unique housing needs in the community. So, you know, I would just say it's taken focus and dedication, and not 1 or 2 strategies, but all of the strategies. My favorite example to cite is in our county. There's a county-led initiative called Home for All, and they keep on their website a chart of every possible housing strategy a city could employ. And the only city that has every box checked is Redwood City. And we actually have some additional ones that aren't on that chart. So we've really looked for how could we add every single tool into our toolbox, give our staff those tools so that when they have the opportunity, we have a piece of land, when we have a developer coming to us with a project, we have the greatest latitude to really negotiate for the housing needs of our community. And we've come up with some really creative and innovative ways of doing this. One way is that instead of having developers contribute to a fund, we just say, just build the housing, right? Build us the housing. We want the housing. We don't want the funds. And so that's actually what's really helped us to get a lot more of these units online much faster. So really incredibly passionate about this topic, really proud of my city, and really excited to share more about how we've been able to get this done. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Giselle. Really appreciate it. So before we jump to some of the scripted questions, I would like to return to the one that I put a pin in and talk a little bit about, for sale affordable housing and kind of, the history. So when I've been now the executive director of the Housing Action Coalition since 2016, and I remember one of the first conversations I had with affordable housing nonprofit in San Francisco, I was all excited to talk about home ownership opportunities in the affordable housing space. And I was somewhat chastised by that affordable housing developer that's not the way we do affordable housing. And I feel like certainly in my 6 years or 7 years now, that is evolving. That kind of, home ownership, low and middle income home ownership opportunity is getting more and more of its time and reason. And so I was just wondering, Sam and Gloria, and then obviously also Giselle, if you would like to opine on kind of, if you want to talk a little about the history or kind of where are we and where should it be as part of the affordable housing conversation.
Sure. I'm happy to
Sam.
go.
Yeah, go ahead, Sam. Yep.
So I think that that's a great question. I think that when we talk about home ownership, and it is truly the way that we build wealth in this country. I think a lot of the reason that the nonprofit affordable housing developers don't like the program is because for some reason, all of our government overlords have decided that people shouldn't be allowed to build equity using public subsidy. So the San Francisco Mayor's Office of Housing does have what's called a down payment assistance program, and they do have what's called a below market rent condo program. But if you are lucky enough to buy a condo through these programs, while you are technically a homeowner, you are not allowed to do things that are really what make home ownership the cornerstone of the American dream, right? You're not allowed to take a credit line out if your kid gets into Berkeley. You're not allowed to, use your home to finance, God forbid, if there's an emergency and you have tons of medical bills or whatnot. You don't build equity in the American dream sense of the word. And so I think my industry is so shell-shocked and PTSD'd from the last 50 years about how hard it is just to raise the affordable monies that we say to ourselves, well, it's not really home ownership in the true market sense. And then what happens is when you sell your condo or your home, you only get paid back what you originally paid for. 100% of the increase in value, your equity, goes back to the government. And so, not that getting paid back isn't good, but I'm saying that I actually don't think it's our industry that's so much against it because it's like rental versus buying. I don't think it's that as much as the really depressingly unnecessary way that the governments have structured the homeowner projects. Habitat for Humanity, for instance, they have a home ownership program, but since they are bound by the municipalities throughout the country, they also, even though they're a private company, they basically are not allowed to let their people who buy their townhomes earn equity. And I think that it's got a lot to do with that.
Really, really appreciate it. Gloria, do you have anything to add?
Sure, I will add to that. And I'll say, first of all, that, what we certainly work on and support home ownership. We have members who do, like Habitat's the one most people think of. I see we have someone from Habitat on the webinar, but we also have other groups like Neighborhood Housing Services that work on it. It's not our core area because we have a mission statement of focusing primarily on the lowest income communities. And sadly, that often means that at least as a first step, homeownership is often out of reach, not always, but often for the lowest income folks. So we're focused more on rental. But I'm glad you asked this question because I agree with most of what Sam said. We can have a whole extremely wonky debate about limited equity home ownership programs. Let's not do that right now. But let's instead talk about the fact that we have a disproportionate distribution of wealth in this country, largely to white and male-headed households because of accumulation of wealth through home ownership. And that's not an accident. That was government design, who was allowed to get accessible loans and where those loans happened. And wealth really sat with certain folks, and that accrues over generations. And so the net worth of a white-headed average white household is far higher than that of a Black-headed household, Latinx-headed household, API-headed household, et cetera. And that is a problem we need to fix. And we don't fix it by insisting that, well, yeah, homeownership is problematic, so let's not do it. No, like that's not how we fix it. And I work with a lot of folks who are passionate advocates for getting more Black and brown folks and white folks with limited means into homeownership. I would love it if we could reevaluate the notion that the main way to be a full stakeholder in society, to have respect and to accumulate wealth, is to own a home. I think that's highly problematic, but it is where we are. So I think we need to keep working on it. And I guess what I'll say to that is, in Alameda County, we advocated in 2016 for the passage of a bond that had a lot of money for rental housing, but also had money for both a home buyer assistance program that has actually been able to reach some low to moderate income and households of color and get them into their first home. And then there's also, as part of that bond, the county also put in actually home preservation loans for seniors who actually aren't wealthy. They have a house, but they're not wealthy. And because they don't have things like grab bars and ramps and things like that in their homes, they're at risk of losing their homes. And these loans have been able to help them stay. So I think we need more solutions like that as well.
Thank you. Mayor Hale, anything you would like to add?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say that I recently gave the State of the City address in Redwood City, and probably was first mayor in our area to just focus on housing. So we just talked about housing and homelessness. And the entire first section was on the history of a lot of what Gloria and Sam referenced. And why we added that in was because we want our residents to understand how we got here, and not to feel blame or shame, but to know that they may have benefited from some of these programs that did not equally benefit all. Right? We talked about the GI Bill, we talked about redlining and other sticky elements of our past. So I do think it is important to talk about that. I really do. And to Gloria's point, talk about the subsidies that we all enjoy if we are homeowners today, and particularly white homeowners, right? There was a comment in the chat about how there's a number of more creative homeownership programs than the government ones. And that's true. There are a number, and it's growing, and that is good. But I do believe the government needs to be a part of the program, because for exactly the reason I just stated, that's what helped so many people have access to that first home buying opportunity. So we are pursuing a land trust in Redwood City. We have been longtime partners at Habitat for Humanity. In fact, I'll be hopefully doing a ribbon cutting soon for a building that has been a long time in the works because of a CEQA lawsuit. Maybe we'll get to that at some point here. But to that, the equity, the importance of homeownership is twofold, right? One is stability. You talk to residents who live in a Habitat program in a unit, they can take all of the mental load that gets dedicated to worrying about rent, and they can put it into their children and their future, and taking them to soccer and taking them to chess or whatever it is. That's what they get to do with their time, and not worry about paying the bills. They have that stability, that view of the future. And then the second is the wealth building opportunity. And so we do need both. It is how wealth is accumulated in this country, and disproportionately so in California because of the ability to transfer property. So it has to be part of the solution long term.
Well, I want to thank the three of you for allowing me to go a little bit off script. I do think that the home ownership conversation is something that always fascinates me and the Housing Action Coalition. I think the intergenerational wealth gap is just something that, if we're going to have a conversation about housing, it needs to be a part of the conversation. Okay, going back on a little bit of script, I was going to turn to Gloria to start this question. It's going to be to all three of you, but this is an easy one, Gloria. If you were going to wave your magic wand and change, any laws that you would like to change to make it easier to produce, I'll use the word produce, more affordable housing, what laws would you like to see changed?
Thanks, Todd. I'm going to do what they coach you to do in media training, which is just whatever question you're asked, answer the question you want to answer. So I'm gonna do that. Which is, yes, of course, there are laws that we want to see changed. At the fundamental, though, I think a lot of what we're doing at EBHO is actually below the laws level. It's actually, I say that what we do actually on a daily basis is try to change hearts and minds, because until we have convinced folks that housing is a human right, that no one should have to earn it, everyone, as Sam said, everyone deserves a place to live. I don't care what color you are. I don't care what job you have or no job. Everyone deserves a place to call home. And until we have internalized that as a society, which most of us have not, the laws are not going to totally fix the problem. So I just think it's so important that we have this kind of conversation so that we can humanize the issue and just really recognize what we're trying to do to build the three magic ingredients of affordable housing or any housing, which is land, funding, and political and public will. And that's kind of an order of difficulty, but it kind of just depends on the jurisdiction because they're all super hard, especially the funding and political and public will. And what laws can do is help with all of those, but especially with the first two. So they can really help with how we are using our land and designating our land. And you've heard already a couple people mention housing elements. If you don't know what that is, you're normal. That's basically a city's housing plan. Where are they going to put their housing? What are the programs they're going to use to support it? Not every city is an overachiever like Redwood City. And so I'm glad we do have laws to strengthen the accountability for those housing plans and what happens if cities actually don't do them and do them correctly. And what we have this year, and I would wave my magic wand, have more of this, is some policies that are conscious of who benefits and who has lost out in the housing race, and especially looking at like racial disparities, gender disparities, and like what can we do to make sure that fair housing is in the forefront. So I think that would be a big piece of it. I also would like us to use public land more efficiently. So we're working in Oakland on a policy that would dictate how the city uses its public land and create more community engagement and affordable homes. I'm supportive of the production and density bills that have passed at the state level for the most part. So I think we need more of those, but mostly we just need people to stop thinking that if you're homeless, it's because there's something wrong with you. If you got evicted, it's because there's something wrong with you. That's what we need to change.
So what I heard you say was CEQA reform. No, I'm kidding. And so that's what I heard. Giselle, I was going to turn it over to you actually, you know what? I'm going to shift it a little bit. So you're a locally elected official, right? And the state has been passing a whole bunch of housing rules, new housing legislation. Like, as a local official, what do you think is the appropriate kind of balance and role of the state housing rules, and how should they be? Do you feel like they are interacting well for Redwood City and Redwood City's rules? So you can either go with either A or B. Either tell me which laws you want to change, or how do you feel about the state laws and how they've been interacting with the local as a local elected official?
The good old local control question, huh?
Yes.
This is the way I think about local control is I think it's less about who's in control and more about what's the best way to solve this problem, right? What are the tools we need to solve this problem? And so if you think about any other crisis experience in the world, if there's a fire, if there's a war, what's the first thing that you do? You call for help, right? So the idea that we should just exist in crisis as local leaders and simply mull in that without there being some assistance from the state, I think is fundamentally flawed. So welcoming it, but also collaborating on what it is and which problems we need solved, when and how. So I think where we've done best is when that has happened. I'll speak really quick about one example of that from Redwood City, but I would say it's probably applicable across the state right now, which is ADU policy, right? Used to be darn near impossible to build an accessory dwelling unit in this state. Very challenging, very different rules, city by city, very arduous. The state had some ADU policies. Redwood City actually has currently a more progressive ADU policy than the state. And it was because we really heard from residents that this was an option that they wanted to have. And they are just wildly popular. right? And what I love about ADUs is, again, not just thinking in terms of units and numbers, it's thinking in terms of people. What are the problems we're going to have in the next 20 years around housing? We have the largest aging population in the history of the country. Who is going to take care of them? I say this all the time when I talk to my wonderful boomer residents. You know, I say, who's going to take care of you? Where do your kids live? I follow it up with, where do your children live? Texas, Colorado, right? Not here anymore. Okay, well, we have a labor shortage of workers who are going to be able to do senior in-home care, and we don't have enough senior in-home care facilities. So the answer is, you're going to probably be with your children. And so what does that need to look like? And so ADUs, and I think even SB9 can be a part of that solution of how we're going to live. We're going to have to live multi-generationally moving into that situation. So we've used it that way. In terms of what, if I could wave a magic wand, you know, I think overall, if you just look at the problem statement of where we are, right, which is supply and demand, we don't have enough, so we need more, then you need to look at what are your constraints, right? We have several constraints. We have a people constraint. We don't have enough staff at the city levels, right, to process. We don't necessarily have enough funding. That's another one. But also the process can take a really long amount of time. And I think that one of the things that is within our control and can be done through better legislation is, how do we get better visibility into the process? And how can we make the technical review process more predictable and more compact? And I do think CEQA, this is where part of the CEQA discussion could fit in. I'm a big environmentalist and a big believer in the need for environmental checks and balances. And I also don't want to see projects like our 100% affordable Habitat for Humanity project right here in Redwood City get delayed by what was effectively a bogus CEQA lawsuit. And then we're adding, you know, needing to add $1 million to the pot to keep that project going. So I think time bounding it. And if you go back to the inception of CEQA, if you look at the documents, if you look at the public debate at the time, this was the very question. The question was around, is the length of the process going to be a problem? I think we have our answer now, right? I think we all know the answer to that question. So I think that's a very reasonable place to start. How do we rein in that length of time? And then overall, greater visibility. Look, we have, in my county, we have over 20 cities. We have, each city has their own set of steps to get through development process. And yet we're all sharing the same set of nonprofit developers, right? So if I'm putting myself into, you know, Sam and Gloria's shoes, it's like, that's a lot to navigate. And I would rather have that expertise going into some other more fruitful process, producing more housing, than it getting sucked into trying to explore and determine what the process is. That's where I'd start.
Thank you, Giselle. So Gloria, I appreciate, I saw that you put into the chat, ADUs means accessory dwelling units. So accessory dwelling units.
Granny flats, yes.
Yeah,
and thank you, Gloria. I'm using, thank you for defining all these terms.
Yeah. So backyard cottages, granny flats, ADUs. And then Giselle also mentioned SB9, which is a piece of legislation that passed last year that said that under certain conditions, right, a plot of land that's zoned for single family housing could be divided, and that you could build two duplexes. So it basically would mean that you can build 4 units of housing on a piece of property that was zoned for single family housing. So just wanted to, just so that we're all working from the same script, or almost the same script. Okay, Sam, I know you don't have a lot of opinions on laws that should be changed to make building affordable housing. So yeah. I'm going to put a clock on you.
That's fine.
Yeah, you ready? Go.
Okay, so mine is actually not an official law. It's actually a HUD government code that Reagan and Nixon decided would be good when we turned our industry into a neoliberal hellscape and began the tax credits are good for everybody, actually part of our industry in 1974. Well, if I had a magic wand, I would take over 1/4 of the military spending away, and I would reinvest and turn the Section 8 spigot back on throughout the country. When Reagan and Nixon kind of said that privatization is important in the 70s, what not a lot of people realized they did was they told HUD, and HUD has never change this, that they're not allowed to give project-based Section 8 contracts to developers. Mission Housing's first 5 buildings, we found a site, we called HUD, we said, we need this much to buy it, we need this much to build it, and then I want you to give me a letter saying that I get 100 Section 8 subsidies when it's done. And then we just went to a bank with that letter. Bank of America cut 1 check, and we did everything in a year. If we were to turn Section 8 back on for developers to have, because it's still individuals and families can still get their own Section 8, but if a company like Mission Housing was allowed to do that again, we would be able to compete with any market rate developer. We would be able to have all the funding that we need, because Section 8 is basically just a guaranteed below market rent direct to payment into the developer's coffers every month for rent. Whereas now, our most recent building that we just built, 1950 Mission, had 8 different funding sources. I was thinking about reading them all, but Todd put me on a timeline, so I'm not going to read them. But it cost $100 million to build, and there were 8 different sources that all believe that they're the most important source. And they all have different timelines, and they all have different reporting requirements. And whereas before, just one place, HUD, Section 8. And honestly, if we turn Section 8 back on, tens of thousands of affordable housing units across the country would pencil out overnight. And so that's what I would do.
Thank you. Members in the audience, I believe you're already doing this. I believe there will be time on the back end for some questions from the audience. So please use the Q&A feature to ask questions. I know some people are already doing that. We are aggregating those questions, and hopefully at the end, we'll be able to get to a handful of the audience questions. So let's see, Sam, how hard is it to finance subsidized affordable housing?
See, prior answer. No, it's incredibly hard. You know, to build a building, you need, like I said, to cobble together between 5 and 10 funding sources. And they work like a Jenga, stack of Jenga blocks. The more you connect, when you get the first one, then you get the second one, then when you have the first 2, then you get the third one, then you have the first 3, you get the fourth one. And anywhere along the line of the 2.5, 3 years it takes to do this process, if you lose any of them, you lose all of them. And like I said, they all have the California Housing and Community Development, which is like California's HUD, HCD. They act like there are no local municipalities. They don't think the San Francisco Mayor's Office of Housing exists. And I'm pretty sure they don't think HUD exists either. HUD thinks the same for the other 2. San Francisco Mayor's Office of Housing would absolutely like to be the only entity and funder in town. And they are typically about 1/3 of every funding source or of every building that gets built. So they are a big chunk. And so they think they're the most important. And, you know, when you add all these things up, it's really hard to build. And the other thing that we talked about that Gloria said, it's really expensive to build our buildings because we are kind of called upon to solve all the ills of the world and the ground floor at every single one of our buildings, right? Reagan and Nixon got rid of the social safety net, and no one has truly brought it back like it should be, right? So mental health facilities, physical health facilities, free childcare, computer labs help with job placement, educational facilities, you know, like you name it, to say nothing about community rooms and spaces for our nonprofit other service providers to have a permanent spot to bring their clients in. All of these things add up to, you know, what's currently upwards of $1 million a unit to build. And that's hard. It's hard to cobble together all that money. And you know, the current housing crisis and the current major, you know, that we have so much less affordable housing in the Bay Area than we need is a direct causation of that.
All right, Sam, made it right in under the wire. Thank you. Gloria, what are the trends you see in community and political attitudes towards affordable housing?
Sure, happy to answer that. I first want to say this is just a technical thing for the panelists. There is a second Gloria Bruce that has materialized on the panel that just posted something in the chat who is not me. So
I thought you were studio. I really thought there was studio.
Yeah,
Okay.
was that?
Oh.
I'm a little weirded out. So
Okay.
if you see something else in the chat, it may or may not be me. So someone from chat can check out what's going on there. But anyway, so let me talk a little bit about, yeah, how have I seen attitudes change? It's not my staff, because I just checked with my staff. So someone please figure out what's going on. I've seen things change a lot. So I've been working at EBHO in one capacity or another almost since 2004. I was an intern there, and then I went and did other things, and I came back. And I have to say, when I started at EBHO, affordable housing was oddly kind of this like niche area that I hadn't even worked in very much, and it was really associated with alleviating poverty, which it still is, of course. It was really thought of as a low-income person's problem. Which it was, but it was not sort of the way it is now, where it has sort of gone up the income chain and really started affecting middle income folks, which has made more people politically pay attention. I wish it didn't have to be that way, but that is something that we've seen. So we've seen in some places kind of the traditional like what we call NIMBY, not in my backyard. Many of you know what this is. Some of that just kind of default resistance to new housing and new growth has softened in some places. In some places, it absolutely has not, as I'm sure Giselle and Sam can attest to. There's still a lot of just like, I don't want this in my neighborhood. And there's a lot of reasons, from semi-legitimate infrastructure concerns to very coded racist, classist, xenophobic reasons that people don't want housing in their neighborhoods. Some of that has danced down as an awareness of how this issue has become a drag on the entire health and prosperity and vitality of our region. I think everybody is starting to get it. And it means that we have counter voices, even though some of those exclusionary voices are very much active. We have other people now who have gotten just as energized to say, like, we need housing, we need tenant protections, we need diverse communities, we want to welcome everybody, whether they're already in our community as a barista, a preschool teacher, a bus driver, or whether they're maybe going to come into our community in the future. That's okay. Cities should welcome change as long as it's sustainable and it's thoughtful. So I think I have seen that change a little bit. And I think there's also a much more actually philanthropic support. There are a lot of tech companies and foundations that are getting more into the housing field than they did before. There are foundations who are putting more money into it than they did before. That is absolutely necessary, and I hope that trend continues. I'd like to see more employers and private sector actors stepping up even more, even though I know some of them are. And I'd love to see companies and private sector actors stepping up in actually the public policy sector, like supporting ballot measures and supporting laws, the kinds of ones that we're talking about. We are starting to see that a little bit more. So I think there are some positive trends. I think during COVID, we also saw some really interesting instances of government moving faster than it had in the past, with things like Project Home Key, enabling motels and other conversions of buildings to be used to house houseless people during the COVID crisis. Complicated program, but largely successful. So I think that's something we didn't think could have happened. I also don't think, if you had asked me 3 years ago whether many local governments and the state would pass COVID-related eviction protections and keep people in their homes, and also that there would be a lot of money for rental assistance. I think those are things that do show that people understand how much pain this housing crisis is causing. So that's definitely different than when I entered this work in 2004. And at the same time, like everything we're seeing on the national scale, there's conflicting trends of intense backlash, intense anti-government, anti-common good, anti-inclusionary sentiment that's out there as well. And I think it's just part of the whole like civic fabric that we live in. So it's complicated, but I'm hopeful that if we keep up this conversation and we figure out also how to weave this in more, not just with the economic conversations, which has happened for a while, but also with climate resiliency. How do we deal with fires? How do we deal with water infrastructure? How do we build this into the continued racial reckoning and public safety? Then I think we will continue to get somewhere.
Thank you. Great. Mayor Hale, you've talked a little bit about how proud you are of Redwood City, and I think you should be, and great work. I was wondering if there's specific projects or specific policies that you've led on that you are particularly proud of that you would speak to.
Sure. Well, I mean, I've already dropped a few of them, right? So I think having that strategic alignment was important. Our ADU policy definitely led the way. Actually, the state is now kind of copying it. So there is a new Wachowski bill that I think cleans up some of the areas they were seeing ADUs get blocked in other cities. It looks a lot more like our policy in Redwood City. And then I mentioned asking developers to build the housing instead of just contribute to the fund has been incredibly successful, not just for housing, also for childcare. We did 2 projects that included both affordable housing and childcare. Affordable childcare. The first one we did was building the childcare. The second one, we'd gotten even smarter, and we said, now we need it subsidized. So the rent for that childcare provider is going to be $1 for 15 years. And so that way, the nonprofit childcare provider, they're called Footsteps, can pass along affordable childcare. You know, in the Bay Area, childcare now exceeds rent, if you can believe that, for the average working family, right? So they are really challenged between, you know, 2 of the main expenditures in a family budget, right? So we see the need for both. We've prioritized both. Something else that we've done is interesting is focusing on family-sized units. You're seeing a lot of families leaving the area, and then you see the impacts that has on schools. You know, I visited 3 schools in the last few weeks. I heard the same thing from the principals, from the superintendents, and that is the declining enrollment matched with what we're seeing now is a declining birth rate. And so it's going to change how education will look in the coming years. So housing is going to impact education. And not just on the student side, also on the teacher side, because they're seeing fewer and fewer teachers express an interest. I know at least in Redwood City, a teacher's starting salary would put them at very low income housing, right? So that's still tricky. But I do want to say we've also done quite a bit on homelessness. You know, despite our leadership on housing, unfortunately, we still see very, you know, increasing rates of homelessness in our area. And we've done a couple of innovative things. So when we had RV homelessness in Redwood City, the solution du jour was to build a safe parking program, right? So you put vehicles onto a safe parking program, you're able to deliver services more efficiently. You can contain some of the health and safety impacts related to having vehicles on streets that were never intended to be on streets for living. And you can get folks housed. Well, the issue at the time was that you could only do that for 12 hours without there being a landlord tenancy issue. And the city possibly getting sued for relocation assistance or other benefits. So we simply said we should probably change that law. And we worked with Assemblymember Ting's office on AB 2553. So that has helped us tremendously. The residents that we had living in RVs are now almost, you know, most of them are permanently housed or on a path to permanent housing because we had everyone in one place. We were able to work with our nonprofit partners and really do the casework to get folks housed. And also on that note, we just completed a land swap with the county. This relates as well to Project Home Key. I mean, I think our county really cleaned up on Project Home Key. We have 3 hotels right here in Redwood City. And again, when a lot of cities were, you know, speaking out against them, we spoke not only in favor, but we contributed our own funds, $1.3 million, to the conversion of one of those hotels because we know how important those units will be. And so the project we did with the county was we swapped a piece of land that will now allow for 250 units of temporary housing. These residents will get a key, very important. It is not just a shelter bed. They are getting their own place. And the navigation center with all the services that we'll need. So it's an and conversation, not an or conversation. We're really, really prioritizing building the housing at all levels. And we know that we have a rising homelessness issue that we need to be on top of and ahead of and providing solutions for that population as well. And so I'm really proud that we've worked at both levels. Or also, one other thing I should mention is our county is committed to functional zero, which is basically driving down homelessness to a level that is functionally zero this year, which is pretty crazy. And I do think of it as a really unique pilot for the state of where you could apply intense funds, get these units up and online quickly. We broke ground on this navigation center a couple of weeks ago. We're hoping it's online by December. So this type of quick build, move fast project is really innovative and unique. And I think that's more of what we need on this issue.
Thank you. Appreciate that. So I'm going to ask a fairly leading question because I don't know how else to ask it without it being leading, but I would love to have a quick conversation about the intersection of housing, the intersection of affordable housing and the environment, right? That often we think about, we know that, right, lower income workers often have to live further and further and further away from where they work. And I think that it becomes pretty obvious that becomes an environmental problem pretty quickly. So, so to ask kind of the question, from an environmental point of view, how important is it to be building affordable housing near job centers and transit centers? And Sam is nodding in agreement, so I am going to start with Sam.
I mean, it's really important. It's as important as it gets. First off, the LEED certified, you always hear like a building's LEED Platinum or Gold. Those standards have only recently caught up to the affordable housing industry's standards of building. Because it's so expensive to build our buildings, we really only get this one bite at the apple. We build our buildings as energy net zero sustainable as possible. And when we build our buildings, we also bring in naturally a lot more public resources. You're more inclined to have an extra bus route nearby. You're more inclined to, have a train station nearby. We do try to build next to transit. And if you think back to the workers and who makes what jobs are, compared to 50, 60, 70% of the AMI, area median income, our service industry has been exported out to the outer East Bay because we haven't built enough housing for them. And, forcing people to drive into the city or to work at their job because there isn't high quality affordable housing near that job is an ecological nightmare. And so the more affordable housing we can build everywhere, the better. It's just that plain and simple.
Gloria or Giselle, anything you want to add to Sam's answer? That was the answer I was looking for.
Yeah. Go ahead, Gloria.
Oh, I just say real quick. Everything Sam said, and I think I would just add the sort of environmental justice and health layer onto that, which is that we also, need to be thinking about where do we site affordable housing. Unfortunately, a lot of the transit-oriented and very central sites are also near points of pollution. Sometimes they're near freeways and things like that. So making sure, I think one thing a lot of the developers we work with make sure of is that there are good air filtration systems in place, even more important in the time of COVID, right? They're making sure that the building materials are healthy and sustainable, which in private market cheaper housing is not true. People are exposed to lead and mold from older housing. So I think those environmental health issues, also going electrification of power and energy in affordable housing is also really, really important, and that has health impacts for the people inside the building as well. Just a couple of additions.
Yeah, and just by way of making that concrete, so I'd mentioned earlier our previous 7 years of RENA, of this housing element exercise, and the units that we put in, almost 3,000. About 2,500 of those were right in our downtown, right near Caltrain. So from 2006 to 2015, we only saw 4% population growth. During that same period of time, we had a 73% growth in Caltrain riders. And so what we found was that these residents where we put housing right near the train, they took the transit option, right? And if you look at as a county, and it's probably similar in other counties in the Bay Area, over 50% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from transportation. So those two are inextricably linked. Where you put the housing, where the jobs are, matters a ton. And then the next biggest bucket, and Sam mentioned this, is buildings, right? That's about 20%. And so building electrification is something that we've really promoted in our county. We were one of the early cities to adopt that through Peninsula Clean Energy. They put together a set of REACH codes. And so it does matter that every future footprint where we are building is electric, right? And so we are able to do that. And all of our recent affordable housing developments have been electric. So it's nice to see us go into that direction.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, I'm going to go to a couple of audience questions. One that grabbed my attention, or there's a couple. One is, how do you view social housing? Do you think government has a role to build directly? How does that interact with our current system of affordable developers? And where do you want to see the social housing conversation go? And happy to start with you, Gloria.
Oh my gosh, I was hoping you weren't going to start with me on this one. I was hoping you were going to start with Sam.
I was hoping you'd start with Sam too, and I think he unmuted. I think he was
I'll
like
go.
ready to go.
I feel bad. I don't want to take up all the, air. Gloria, I'm happy to go if you want me to go first.
Go for it, and I will add. So I was dealing with a second grader emergency, which was not an emergency. But I'll let Sam start this one.
I think that social housing is great. I think that it would be awesome if we had a government entity that could properly build and fund and run 100% government-owned social housing. The last 50 years would argue that that isn't possible. We had a thing that was supposed to be, social housing. It was called Every Housing Authority and public housing. And the city of San Francisco had to just recently have all of our nonprofit affordable housing developers take away formerly public housing because the Housing Authority of San Francisco was never given more than 80% of the budget it asked for from HUD since its inception in the 40s. And so I think the government does have a role to play. I think that we should get rid of the mortgage interest tax deduction and fully fund federally paid for social housing. And I get sad because a lot of people in my industry think that it's like an either or. I think that the nonprofit affordable industry is so battered down. There's so much PTSD from how hard it is for us to raise our money, and that there's this thing with people maybe more on Twitter than anything else screaming, what we really need is social housing. And we're like, cool, who's going to build that and who's going to run it? And then they're like, well, you probably can. And we're like, so I get sad because, and I'm guilty of this sometimes too. I think that it's like Giselle said, yes, of course we need that. But I don't want to do it and not do it correctly. And if there's anything that could be used to describe at least the San Francisco Housing Authority and how it interacted with HUD the last almost 75 years, the term would be not correctly, because it was poor, it was bad. Mission Housing has taken over 5 of those formerly public housing buildings. We're currently in the process of rehabbing all of them. To say that they were neglected, both physically and the tenants emotionally, mentally, is the understatement of the year. And so I think social housing is awesome. I just want to be realistic about the government's track record, because it's not like it would be the first time we've tried it.
Yeah, can I just build on that?
Go ahead, Giselle.
Yeah, so
no, go ahead.
I totally agree, and I don't love that it's turning into a social housing versus other housing options. I very much feel but also what level of government, right? We did recently have a proposal for social housing come to our city council, right? We have like 3 housing staff. And so it was like, okay, should we take the existing 600 units of affordable housing our staff is working on getting through the process and deed restriction to advance this other policy that likely will not produce housing in any sort of near-time future? That is not a good use of resources for our level of government. So it is figuring out at what level of government can we get this done? Can we get it funded? What does it look like? This is an area we're talking, right, more local and regional here, but even the federal government needs to play a greater role in programs like this. Sam had mentioned mental health as well earlier. So much started here with Reagan, and then we exported it to the country when we made him president. But those are the ills that have to get undone. And then also these programs have to be modernized so that they're not producing those kinds of results, right? I'm from the Midwest, and friends from Chicago or Boston will talk to you about social housing, and it is not seen in the same light it is seen on Twitter in the Bay Area right now. They have some very strong views on it. So I think we have to, add it to the mix, but let's keep production going through all other channels at the same time.
I think the only thing I'd add really quickly to that, because I know we're short on time, I'd agree with everything Sam and Mayor Hale just said. And I love that you keep pointing out what level of government is appropriate for what intervention, because I think the cities, sounds like Redwood City maybe is trying not to do this. Cities in the Bay Area have a habit of putting out pronouncements of how they're going to fix a national or global problem. And I appreciate the sentiment, but like, this is a federal level issue. And anybody who actually works on housing and tweeting a lot about housing is not actually working in the housing field. Just want to throw that a controversial statement out there.
How dare you? How dare you?
A lot does not make you a housing practitioner, even though it's fun. We'll basically say what you just said. The only nuance I want to add is Sam is right about the sad legacy of most of the public housing authorities in this country and how their housing has had to be privatized, hopefully through partnership with mission-driven organizations. But it wasn't always that way. The initial social and public housing in our country was actually decent quality housing for people who were working class. It was not supposed to be the crappiest housing that was the last resort housing for people, which is what it became, especially for African Americans in San Francisco and many other cities. It actually had an auspicious start that was systemically undercut by government for decades. So let's keep our imaginations open that in this country and still in many others, dignified and quality social housing is possible. So can we get back there again Sunday?
Well said.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Appreciate
That's
all
great.
of you.
And I'd love, if you have any good like book or white paper on that, I would love to learn more about what that goodness looked like.
Okay, so moving on to another audience question. I think this is kind of directed at you, Sam. Can you explain why it takes 8 funding sources to fund affordable housing? For market rate housing, it's often one funder. Why can't affordable housing operate similarly?
So one of the reasons that, and thanks for letting me go again first. One of the reasons that it takes so much to run is that the nonprofit affordable housing industry does not want to make the mistakes of public housing. And what that mistake was we would build the buildings, and then every year we would chronically underfund the amount of money it takes to operate the buildings, the operating funds of a building. So to build a building and be able to charge rents that will allow a new 156 unit building, like at the corner of 16th and Mission, the Mission Housing just opened, 1950 Mission Street, the rents are actually a lot closer to market rate than you would be otherwise imagine. A 3-bedroom unit at 1950 Mission is honestly is less than $1,000 less than a 3-bedroom market rate. The difference is, because we go out and get those 8 funding sources, it's not just about building the building. We build up a really large, what's called operating reserve, so that the rent that Mission Housing gets might be $2,000 a month, but the rent that the low-income family is paying is like $300 a month. And these are just numbers I'm throwing out because they're round. And so it's not just about, and with market rate housing, because you're able to build with one source of money, because you are telling a bank, if you give me this $100 million, I'm going to charge these people $4,000 a month for a 1-bedroom for the rest of their lives. And that money is going to come in, and I'm going to pay my loan to you every month. Affordable housing can't do that because we can't charge rent in the market rate sense of the word to our tenants for more than 30% of their income. And that is not enough to properly run a building with high quality services and make it be not derelict and have it not fall down. So it goes back to when, and I will blame Reagan and Nixon, because they killed Section 8. They defunded HUD. And we used to just have one source. It used to just be Section 8. We would call HUD, they would cut a giant check. They would give us a letter that's the same as a market rate developer telling a bank, we're going to charge this rent if you give us the money. We would tell a bank, if you give us the money, which is basically a market rate loan, our rent will be what you need it to be, because we have Section 8 subsidies. And when we got rid of those, we started to have to cobble all these things together. And that's why we're in the situation that we're in.
Thank you. If either Giselle or Gloria have anything to add, I'm happy to. Feel like, no, you're good. Okay, Gloria?
I'll yes to all that. And I'll just add that, again, just to emphasize again, it's the services, it's the long-term commitment to quality. It's the additional regulation and the way the affordable housing has to meet standards that private market simply does not have to meet, which makes sense. We're stewarding public funds, right? Taxes and bonds and all these other things that we're pouring into this housing that is a public good. And so things like Sam already mentioned, green and environmental standards, which have been extremely high in the affordable housing industry for years, higher labor standards often. So just there's a bunch of stuff. And also, of course, housing discrimination is illegal everywhere, right? But where it actually gets enforced is not even. And a nonprofit housing provider has very strict rules of like, they are not going to discriminate by race, gender, origin, so all of those things are critical, and all of those things cost money and require a lot of different sources and techniques.
We've kind of used the words a couple of times, like wraparound services, right? So I was just wondering, could people just give a couple of examples of like, what are the wraparound services that come with 100% affordable housing projects?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. I mean, it's all the services that you need to stay housed often, right? So, it depends on which population you're talking about. If you're talking about a population experiencing homelessness, it's much more resource intense, right? So everything from job seeking skills, job keeping skills, mental health support, physical health support, food assistance, any manner of needs, basic needs to maintain stability in one's life is really critical. Probably legal services as well for a variety of reasons and needs. So that's what something like a navigation center has a great depth of those. And then when we work with our nonprofit partners, they have services that are appropriate to what they know will be the community that they're serving, which is what's so great about the nonprofit housing partners that we work with, right? It really does vary based on that level of affordability as well. And so it's not just the units and the housing, it's everything that individual needs to be successfully housed long-term that they provide.
Great. I think that's good for me. We're good. So I want to get to one more audience question. I'm going to ask if we can do it quickly because we want to have the Housing Action Coalition wrap-up question at the end that we traditionally do. So in the conversation around housing elements, what makes a good site for housing? Can it have commercial space, either market rate or affordable? What percentage of sites that are identified can we actually expect to be built? Mayor Hale, how do you feel about starting?
Yeah. Sure. So this is it turns out it's not a matter of opinion, right? So this is heavily outlined by the state. I think some of the guidelines for this year included that it has to have, general plan and zoning designation that permits housing, right? We're really unique in that we've just advanced 8 or 12 general plan amendments because we had that much interest in Redwood City. So that's an important one. The other is that it has to be likely to be redeveloped. So it has to be currently underutilized, right? Not something that's currently utilized. And then you say, yeah, this is marked for this is a site, but it's never going to happen. And then have a realistic density. So it's not just maximum density. So there's, and I'm sure that there's even more than that that's prescribed by the state as a part of the process. So, and then from there, you can just really get creative with your community. And that's what we did and what other cities are going through right now. I mean, everybody on here, you can be engaged in this process with your cities. It is, relatively at the tail end, but, this is the time to be weighing in on what you want to see for housing in your communities, because it has to be submitted to the state. And the way it works is that if you submit more than 100%, I think it's like if you do 150%, you can qualify for some additional affordable housing funds. So you will see some cities stretch to that. Not many will stretch to 180%, but there you go.
Gloria, anything you would like to add to that? Sam?
Only that all nonprofit affordable developers really do love to include commercial spaces on our ground floors. It is yet another funding source that helps us down the road to operate. So while it's not always possible, it is something that we strive for.
And we've, by the way, done that a ton. That
Yeah.
has been a very successful formula here. So great job.
Okay, so the last question that is kind of tradition at the Housing Action Coalition as we wrap up panels is, what makes you hopeful in the affordable house? Well, what makes you hopeful is usually the question, but we'll add, what makes you hopeful in the affordable housing space? And I'm going to start with you, Gloria.
Thanks, Todd. What makes me hopeful in this space is just it's also the same thing that makes me tear my hair out occasionally, is all the people and minds and voices that are really grappling with this. And like I said a little earlier, I actually don't think that was the case 15 years ago. So to have the mayor of a city speaking total wonkify and also completely humanized in a really informed way about affordable housing. I mean, sadly, that's not common everywhere in the Bay Area, but that's inspiring. Having Sam break this down for us and all the housing and mission housing is created over decades, that's inspiring. The challenges are so huge, but I have to think that if we can all just get out of each other's way and work together, let's reframe our work with abundance, because if the Bay Area, with the bright minds that we have, the passion for social justice, the diversity, and yes, the resources, we have the ingredients. So it's hard sometimes, but I want to be helpful. I want to be hopeful that we can get there.
Sam.
I'm hopeful because of you all. You know, a year and a half ago, Mission Housing was part of the team that got the Balboa Reservoir entitled. And we were the first team out of 5 over 50 years. The other 4 had failed brutally. And we did it because of groups like the Housing Action Coalition and EMB Action, you know, turned out organizing members to out support projects. What I really love about the new reality of housing advocacy is not that I ever think Westwood Park is going to want to live next to the poors. They're not. St. Francis Wood doesn't matter. What I know now is that when 100% affordable housing development's getting suggested in a neighborhood, especially where maybe it hasn't been built, there is a veritable army of supporters who will also call in and also say that they live in the neighborhood and also point out that they support the housing. And, you know, I think that our industry, just selfishly, the nonprofit affordable industry, has never enjoyed as much support as we do right now. And that makes me hopeful. So thank you.
Mayor?
That is a great reason to be hopeful. And I am definitely a beneficiary of that in Redwood City. I mean, that is, I think, how you get the type of results you see. It is all those voices coming out. And I think that relates to this idea that the political will is building. You know, you are seeing politicians who are unabashedly in favor of meeting the housing needs in the communities getting elected. I think that the assembly seat in San Francisco recently was just a very interesting data point on that. There was a stark contrast on those candidates and where they stood on housing. So housing is cool. Like, housing is, people want this. They want to be about it. I think you even see some candidates repositioning to seem like they are about it. So that's great. I'm also excited we're having hard conversations. I think the conversation happening at the state right now on workforce and housing development is a good sign that there are no longer third rails, that we can talk about issues that are keeping from production. And so I'm referring to Assemblywoman Wick's AB, I think it's 2011.
Yes.
Which talks about affordable housing production and workforce issues, which have long been, a known issue, a known factor. And getting everybody at the table, having this conversation is so healthy. It makes me proud of government. So I think when I see stuff like that happening, yeah, that's the sort of thing we need to be doing more of.
Yeah, I actually think that's great homework for everyone too. If you do not know about AB 2011, Assemblymember Wicks's piece of legislation, Google it and do some reading on it, because it is where there's a lot of conversations going on. It's going to be significant to see what happens with that piece of legislation. Well, sadly, our time has come to an end, but I really want to thank the three of you. It's great to always have experts and Sam.
Thank you so much.
Just for these conversations on on topics that that are just so important to San Francisco, the Bay Area, and California. And so thank you so much. I also want to thank all of our co-hosts, the Silicon Valley at Home, Greenbelt Alliance, Housing Leadership Council, and YIMBY Action. And finally, thanks to everyone who joined us. And we'll look forward to welcoming you to more Housing Action Coalition events in the near future. Have a great evening.
Have a good one, everybody. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, everyone. Thank you to HAC. Bye-bye.